Hi, this is Steve Kostanski, writer, director, editor, creature effects designer of PG Psycho Goreman, and you're listening to The Graveyard Show.
Welcome to the Graveyard.
And welcome to another edition of the Graveyard Show podcast. I am your caretaker, and the graveyard is open. Well, we're going to get a little bit psycho on this podcast. Well, to be more specific, we're going to talk about the film PG Psycho Goreman, which is currently available in select theaters, on digital, and on demand. And as you heard at the top of the show, the man behind the film, he is the writer, director, the creature effects designer, and also one of the editors of the film. Steve Kostanski will join me in just a minute to talk about his film, which is getting all kinds of great press, a lot of interest, and a lot of love out there. It's a really well done film, and he and I will talk about it in just a moment. Now, one of the things that I've noticed on occasion when I've talked about the title of this film, sometimes I will misenunciate. So instead of calling it Psycho Goreman, I see I almost did it again. I will sometimes call it Psycho Goreman. It's just the way I pronounce it. It's not correct. It's actually Psycho Goreman. And apologies if sometimes I have a little bit of a slip, just the way I talk sometimes. But if you'd like to call me out on it, well, the best way to do that is by email. A little tie-in there. The email address to the program is gyspodcast@gmail.com. gyspodcast@gmail.com is how you can get in touch with the program. Send me your thoughts, comments, suggestions, as well as if you're a part of the horror community and you would like to get a little bit of promotion, please feel free to reach out and we'll talk about it. In the meantime, I would also like to invite you to join me on my newest endeavor called CATACOMBS of Horror. It is a YouTube exclusive production that I'm putting on, which you can find on the Graveyard Show Podcast's YouTube channel. Now, on Catacombs of Horror, it is very different than what you would get here on the Graveyard Show Podcast. This is a very interview-driven show. Catacombs of Horror is a place where I go to talk about all things horror that I would like to talk about here on the podcast, but it would just make the podcast way too long. Now, on the very first show, I talk about 1980s horror and what I feel best represents 1980s horror in the following categories: franchise, villain, scream queen, and director. And joining me to talk about what he thinks best represents those four categories as well is the man behind the films In Search of Darkness Parts 1 and 2, David Weiner. So check it out. It's Catacombs of Horror. It's found on the Graveyard Show Podcast's YouTube channel. And hopefully one day I will also create a channel just for that show. And again, it is YouTube exclusive only and tons of video production, and reminds me why I do an audio podcast. Stay tuned after the interview. I have some rare news and notes on some films. Sun, Dreamcatcher, Honeydew, and a newly acquired film by Dark Star and Bloody Disgusting. And I also have a special congratulations to a previous guest who just won an award at a recent film festival. In the meantime, as you hear in the background, a new grave is being added. And when that happens, it means only one thing. My guest is here, and it's time for me to get to work. PG Psycho Goreman is the story of a brother and sister who unwittingly resurrect an all-powerful ancient alien overlord who was entombed on Earth millions of years ago after a failed attempt to destroy the universe. The film is currently available at select theaters, on demand, and digital, and it has been incredibly well received and has drawn comparisons to the Power Rangers, the Monster Squad movie, and even the movies produced by Trauma Films. Stephen Kostanski is the writer, director, editor, and creature designer of the film, and some of his previous credits include ABCs of Death 2, The Void, and Leprechaun Returns, and it is really my pleasure to welcome Stephen inside the Graveyard. Stephen, thanks for joining me on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to be here.
Well, I've been really looking forward to speaking with you since seeing the film. It's really well done. The first thing, I just wanted to get right to the basic question. How did you come up with the story?
It's pretty simple origin in that I was watching Rawhead Rex one day, and I was just kind of riffing on ideas in my head. Because I was like, I like this concept of like an ancient evil being resurrected. It's such a basic, like all-encompassing kind of horror concept. But it's like, what's like a thing you can do with that like I hadn't seen before? And I just somehow I landed on the idea of merging it with like an E.T. type story, like a kid's adventure film. And I felt like those two genres, like the kind of like dark horror monster movie, like sci-fi fantasy monster movie, merged with the like more upbeat like 80s early 90s kids adventure film, like those genres are so at odds that it made me laugh anytime I tried to like mash those scenarios together, because they seem to always like cancel each other out. And so I had so much fun just kind of like riffing on that concept that the whole concept of PG was born from.
So the title of the film is PG Psycho Goreman. So at what point did you decide to settle on that for the film's title? And was there ever a concern that maybe the title might not translate what was going on in the script?
I was happy to commit to a completely absurd title. And I just like the idea of having something that was sort of like E.T. And I was also surprised that nobody had done like the ratings system, like abbreviations before for a title. Like, it just seemed like such easy, free marketing to piggyback like a rating with your movie title. And also, again, to go back to Rawhead Rex, like such a nonsensical title that used to like bother me as a kid because it's so weird that I wanted something like that. I wanted something that like people had to say out loud that was just total nonsense. And I just like the idea of like a bunch of studio execs like discussing the movie, like sitting around a boardroom having to say Psycho Goreman to each other. That just made me laugh. So it was a bit of a troll on the audience for sure.
That's well done. I like that. Well, as far as your film goes, I have to say I really loved the retro feel of the film. It had the feel of an 80s and a 90s type film. Power Rangers, Monster Squad, The Gate, these are all movies where kids had to handle an adult situation. So were those movies that you drew from when you were putting the story together?
Yeah, definitely Power Rangers. Like that whole genre of like TV and movie, like the Japanese like Super Sentai shows, and like that, like those kinds of creature heavy like action, sci-fi action movies and TV shows were a huge influence. But also, The Gate was definitely an influence. Masters of the Universe was a big influence in the film. I have a soft spot for adaptations of like other media, like toys and video games and comic books, and like those kinds of misfires in the 80s and 90s, like attempting to bring that stuff to the big screen. And so I wanted to emulate that a little bit with my film. I like the idea of like the idea that like PG was maybe like like a cartoon or something that some studio had to figure out how to translate into a live action movie. And then pulling the Masters of the Universe card of like, well, let's set it in suburbia. I just really, for some reason, enjoy having to take such a like giant story and scale it down into like the most mundane location possible. I thought it is just such a funny trope to me that I want to make a movie that had that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the movie, your movie rides the line of having like this Thanos-like creature, and he's at the whim of these two kids. It's like the Avengers meets Monty Python. It creates some great absurd moments in the film, and I was wondering, was it tough trying to balance the humor with the drama when you were putting the scripts together?
Not really, because in a lot of cases I like mashed the two together. Like I never wanted the audience to feel like, okay, this is a joke moment and now this is a moment of drama. Like I wanted to layer things a little better than that. So like I wanted to have a heartfelt conversation between Greg the dad and Mimi, and have Greg giving her a pep talk. I wanted the emotional like payoff of that, but at the same time I wanted it to be funny. So giving him a speech that's like basically him admitting to like being molested by a guy in a van and using that as like his story to like hype up Mimi for what she's about to do, like made me laugh. But I feel like it also pays off dramatically because like the emotion, even though the story is insane, the emotion is there. And so I feel like the whole movie was like doing that, like mashing both things together. So it's like you can laugh, but also get the emotional catharsis at the same time. So that was how I at least attempted to ride that line.
Well, that's what I enjoyed about it, because it's kind of like what I always say with like Stephen King. He always takes these sort of average people and then he puts them in with, he adds the horror element to it. And with your film, this could have been a family drama or even like a family comedy, and then you take this you know, gigantic story of this all-powerful creature that they now have to deal with. I never felt like the relationship between the parents and the kids were fake or forced at all, and I certainly felt the chemistry between Mimi and Luke as brother sister. I mean, you really created a great relationship with the two siblings. It felt real. And you could feel that in the very first scene between the two characters. Was it challenging creating the dialogue with them, or was this something, I don't know, are you an only child? Do you have brothers or sisters? Was this something that you had experience with as far as dialogue?
I have a brother, and I mean, like, there's lots of kids, like, in my life, like younger cousins and kids, coworkers and things that I interact with and stuff. Just from like observing them and just from memories of my own childhood, I was able to kind of craft this weird dialogue that the kids, like how they kind of had their own way of speaking to each other and kind of dealing with situations. And it was a thing that I felt like I wasn't seeing with kid characters a lot in movies. I hate the like kind of wide-eyed innocence that a lot of kids have, because I feel like that's not true to life. And so I wanted to make characters that felt crazy in the way that kids are crazy, like before you become a teenager and start to develop like self-awareness and self-doubt and you know, are just a little more aware of things. As a kid, it's like you're living in this fantasy world where you're in charge of everything, you make the rules, like you craft reality to what you want it to be. So I want kids that reflected that. And so yeah, a lot of that was in the writing, but also just in Nita, who plays Mimi, and Owen, who plays Luke. Like, just Nita and Owen's personalities, like, really brought that out in their interactions with each other. So a lot of the credit really does go to their performances as well.
Was it something where they were reading the dialogue that they said, we'd like to change this, or did they kind of riff with anything? Did you let them kind of go and improv it all, or how close to the script was it?
I mean, it stuck pretty close. There was a little bit of like drifting around here and there with the characters, but I don't know. I feel like we stuck like surprisingly close. It was more just a case of like building on what was already there.
Sure.
And a lot of that was like, what's like a little like extra quirk we can add to this scene on the day? Like, what's like a random thing we can throw in just to make this a little bit stranger?
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like we just surprisingly followed the script like fairly closely.
Well, you talked about the two actors, Nita, who plays Mimi, Owen, who plays Luke. How did you end up getting them cast in the film?
It was just a very traditional casting process. We put out a casting call, got self-tapes, and it was just like cast a wide net across Canada and partially through the States. And yeah, like Nita was one of the first tapes we got. And even though, like, even in that first tape, like, I could see like we'd have to steer her a bit to get to what I needed her to be, but she still had a level of professionalism and was like doing things with the character that I found were interesting. And yeah, we just kept calling her back and just kept expanding upon the character. And same with Owen as well. Like Nita and Owen already had so much of like Mimi and Luke to them to begin with. Like, it was very easy to steer them into what they needed to be. So we really liked that.
How hard was it shooting the crazy ball sequence at the beginning of the film, and how long did it take to shoot that with Nita and Owen?
I mean, we had something like an afternoon, I think, to shoot that. It was not a lot of time, which is the running theme of shooting this movie. It was real, like, run and gun scenario.
Yeah.
And also, we weren't helped by the weather, which was a total disaster. It was, like, rainy and miserable through most of the shoot, which we weren't planning for. But honestly, like, when it got to that scene, like, Nita and Owen just got into it, and it's a real testament to their professionalism and also their just, like, youthful energy. They were jumping around, chucking those balls back and forth and not complaining. Like, they just got right into it. Got dirty, got down in the mud and played this game and didn't complain once. It was great.
Oh, that's awesome. So they were kids. That's great.
Yeah, we just let the kids be kids, and they did fantastic at it.
Yeah. I mean, Anita just brought this energy and this force behind Mimi, who really is such a strong character to begin with, since she's the one who is controlling PG. I mean, how much energy did she bring to this part?
So much. All the energy. I mean, it was definitely a concern early on. Like, when I wrote the script, everybody was like, this is great, but, like, what if we can't find people to pull off these, like, kids to pull off these characters? And especially Mimi, because we needed somebody that the audience would be convinced they could stand up to this, like, giant monster man, like this evil, like, all-powerful alien warlord, like, to be able to, like, get in his face and tell him what to do. We needed somebody that I could believe that. And she, like, Nita just had so much of that energy already ready to go that, like, when she got to set, there was, like, no question that she would be in charge. Like, she was not fazed by the monsters around her at all. It was great.
Yeah, you could tell. I mean, you could just see it in the takes that she just went for it. And it felt real, which was great. Even in this kind of absurd story where you have, I mean, such great dialogue. Let's talk about PG, the character. I know you had one actor do the voice of PG, and then you had Matthew... Steve Lahos did the voice, and then Matthew Ninneber was actual PG in costume. So did Matthew have experience working in a costume before, or was this his first time ever trying?
No, he'd never been in a creature suit before. This was all new to him, and I mean, I warned him straight up that it was going to be hell, and it was. It was a very punishing experience for him. I mean, he did fantastic, and really, like, was up to the challenge, but people don't realize that, like, creature performing is a thankless job. And this goes for Kristen as well, who played Pandora, and Alexis played Robo-Susan later in the movie. Like, they all had to wear these suits. And it was, like, it's exhausting. You're blind, you have trouble breathing, you can't hear, you're, like, sweating, because, you're overheating, like, and everybody's staring at you because you look weird. So it's, like, you go through a bit of a crisis doing that. And Matt, like, there's definitely a learning curve, but he got there and he pulled it off. And being in that suit every day, like, I would not wish that on anyone, but he did it and did a fantastic job.
How easy was it to walk around in that thing? I mean, I'm assuming the entire suit itself was practical. I don't think there was anything on there that was mechanical, was there?
No, it was entirely just a foam latex suit, like a suit that he stepped into. There was gloves, and then a mask that we glued down every day around his eyes and mouth. It was, it was a fairly simple construct. The only, like, elaborate part of it was the UV paint that we put on him. So when we hit it with a black light, it would make the pink cracks on it pop.
Okay.
So it was like a fairly simple suit, but that doesn't change the fact that, like, he had, like, an inch or more of foam latex around his entire body, trapping him.
How long would it take for him to get into the costume?
I believe it was a couple hours a day. Like, I think it was like around 2.
Okay.
Maybe don't quote me on that, but I believe that's what it was, like, every day to get him in the suit and, like, glued in and blended and painted.
So your shooting days had to really be carefully planned because you have one actor who's got to get in and is basically 2 hours getting into makeup at least. And I say makeup being obviously the suit. And then you have the kids who you have to give breaks to and school time and everything for. So, I mean, how challenging were your shoot days?
No, they're very challenging. Like, because, yes, those two things were factored into every day. So it would be like, in a lot of cases, we would start with the kids while Matt was being processed. Then there'd be like a bit of overlap where we'd shoot scenes with the kids and PG, and then the kids would have to be wrapped like around 8 hours, and then we would shoot just PG. A lot of times we were shooting like over doubles. Like we would just get crew members to like put like Luke's jacket on or something, and we'd shoot over their shoulder as Luke. Like, so we would shoot like over PG onto the kids, get the kids coverage, wrap the kids, and then shoot over a double at PG, getting PG's coverage. And that's how we would fill out our days. So it was definitely a puzzle every day trying to figure out how to kind of like make everything line up, because that's not even accounting for the million other factors every day that we have to account for.
Yeah.
So
and the weather.
It was really complex.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I got to give credit to Scott Weatherall, who was our first AD, and he just like the first AD carries these kinds of projects, like, because they're the ones that have to keep it all straight in their head and they have to schedule all this stuff. And he was like, he really just kept this thing from crashing and burning every day. I think first AD is a job that needs a lot more credit, because like a lot of the work falls on them to make it all happen. And he did a fantastic job on this movie. It was really awesome to see him work.
Yes, it does. Running a set is not easy, that's for sure. And when you have the elements working against you, it's even that much harder. You have an extensive background in special effects makeup. I would think on a film like this, that really came in handy. So how involved were you with the creature costumes?
Very involved in that. I was building a lot of the stuff myself. I mean, I had a whole team at Masters Effects that was building a lot of the creatures, but we were so low budget that it came down to like a lot of just me pumping stuff out like on off hours at the shop, and just kind of like just trying to make it all happen, because it was like an insane build list for such a small amount of money. So yeah, it was a great team of people at the shop who they also put in extra time just to make it all happen, just because everybody wanted to make all these monsters come to life on screen.
Yeah.
It was a very ambitious build list for the creatures, but it was also a lot of fun because everybody got to have a little bit of wiggle room to play around and come up with crazy stuff and kind of develop the creatures as we were building them, which is not the typical process. I mean, usually it's like you do a concept art and 3D rendering, and then everybody goes off of that. But with this, my process is more like using like found objects and things, and like just kind of designing as you're building and finding the character, like kind of in the process of making the character. And so that let everybody kind of play around a bit more and kind of put their personality into things.
I mean, when creating the look for PG, was that the look that you originally planned for, or was it something that came about through just the process of creating the actual character's costume?
Well, as I say, like, I don't like to do design. PG and Pandora were actually two that were designed. On like a very simple level, the concept artist named Aurelio, who's a comic book artist, I got him to draw up a few sketches for me. And he did kind of very simple sketches of those two characters. So off of those, I expanded what ultimately was the look of PG and Pandora. And as far as how I settled on his look, what I wanted for PG was I wanted him to feel like a toy that as a kid, if I saw it at the toy store or Walmart or whatever, like on the shelf, I would want to buy it. And so I was trying to combine all the elements of things that I remember liking and things that would catch my eye as a kid, and tried to just mash those all into one creature that was simple enough but still had elements that popped that I would have gravitated towards if I saw it on the shelf. And so And that logic really applied to most of the creatures. It was like a simple kind of overall, like, kind of design and look, but then like diving deeper into that and finding ways to like expand upon them in ways that don't make it just kind of a jumbled mess, like keeping things simple and iconic, but not sacrificing detail at the same time.
Sure. So you opted to do more practical effects in this than CG. How did the decision come to doing that, as opposed to just putting all of your eggs in the old computer basket to make all your effects and your blood and everything?
Yeah, well, I mean, that wouldn't really be true to the kind of movie I was trying to make. Like, I'm making a movie that's in the spirit of something like Power Rangers, that's all practical. Like, it had to be practical. I mean, I also work in practical effects. That's my day job. So it really was an excuse for me to just build a bunch of monsters. Yeah, I mean, to me, just practical effects, not to diminish computer effects. I certainly love them and think there's some great stuff out there. But I just like the tactile quality of practical creature effects. And with this movie especially, I wanted it to have a bit of a homemade vibe and a bit of a, like, to go back to like Power Rangers and Super Sentai, like that sort of tone and look where it's not about realism, it's just about being iconic and like eye-catching and cool. And so, yeah, that was like just my overall attitude towards the movie, is like get it in camera and enhance with VFX. Like get a baseline of practicality and then build on that in post if you can. So that was my attitude with the movie.
Well, you did an amazing job with it. Congratulations on the film. If people want to follow you, are you online anywhere where they can go and follow you?
Yeah, if you go to @kill_Kostanski on Instagram, that's my account where I like to post work stuff and PG behind the scenes stuff. So that's where everybody can go to check out my work.
Stephen Kostanski, he is the writer, he is the director. I also didn't get a chance to mention, he was also one of the editors of the film. PG, Psycho Goreman, check it out in select theaters, on demand, and digital. Stephen, thanks so much for joining me here inside the graveyard. I really appreciate it. Look forward to having you come back sometime again to talk about another one of your horror projects.
No problem. Thanks for having me. It was a good time.
And as I put this interview to rest, I would again like to thank Stephen for joining me on the program. Again, you can catch PG Psycho Goreman in select theaters, on demand, and on digital. It really is a crazy film in all the right ways, and I cannot recommend it enough. It is an awesome movie. And if you are a fan of the Power Rangers, you're going to love this movie. Quickly, before I move on to news and notes, I just wanted to send congratulations to writer-director Marjorie DeHay for taking home the award for Best Direction Feature for her film Bottle Monster at the Agropoli International Film Festival. Marjorie and Paul Overacker, who is the producer of the film as well, and shot it. They were on the podcast late last year, so I just wanted to say congrats to Marjorie. Well done, and really happy to hear the great news. All right, as I begin to close down the graveyard, some quick news and notes. The movie Son will be released by RLJE Films in March. The film is written and directed by Ivan Kavanaugh, and it stars Andy Matichak, Emil Hirsch, and Luke David Blum. The film is... A synopsis is as follows. After a mysterious group of individuals breaks into Laura's home and attempts to steal her 8-year-old son, David, the two of them flee town in search of safety, but soon after the failed kidnapping, David becomes extremely ill, suffering from increasingly sporadic psychosis and convulsions. Following her maternal instincts to save him, Laura commits unspeakable acts to keep him alive, but soon she must decide how far she's willing to go to save her son. Son will be released on March 5th in theaters, on demand, and on digital. Also available on March 5th is going to be the film Dreamcatcher, which stars Lou Ferrigno Jr., Zachary Gordon, and Adrian Wilkinson, and Travis Burns. The film was written and directed by Jacob Johnston, and the film centers around two estranged sisters who, along with their friends, become entrenched in a 48-hour whirlwind of violence and mayhem after a traumatic experience occurs at an underground music festival. Dreamcatcher will be available again again on digital, on demand, and in select theaters on March 5th. Dark Star and Bloody Disgusting have announced that they have acquired the North American distribution rights to the film Dementia Part 2. The film was produced by the writing-directing team of Matt Mercer and Mike Teston in just 30 days, and it's a sequel to Teston's 2015 original film. In Dementia Part 2, Suzanne wasn't always confused. She wasn't always dead either. When an ex-con takes a job as a handyman for an unstable elderly woman to avoid a parole violation, it becomes a choice he may regret. Dementia Part 2 is expected to be released in theaters in late spring, with the VOD, digital, and DVD release to follow in early summer. The trailer for the film Honeydew is available online. The film is written and directed by Devereaux Milburn, and it stars Sawyer Spielberg, Malin Barr, and Barbara Kingsley. Honeydew tells the story of a young couple who are forced to seek shelter in the home of an aging farmer and her peculiar son when they suddenly begin having strange cravings and hallucinations, taking them down a rabbit hole of the bizarre. Honeydew will be in theaters March 12th, and starting April 13th, it will be available on digital and on demand. You can catch the trailer on YouTube, and if you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, I've attached the link to the show notes below, so just check that out. And speaking of YouTube, yes, the final tie-in. Again, I invite you to join me on my latest endeavor, Catacombs of Horror, which is available only on YouTube, and it can be found on the Graveyard Show Podcast's YouTube channel. Would love to get your thoughts and comments as to what you think, and if you agree or disagree with David and I on our selections for what we chose for the 4 categories. And again, if you'd like to reach out, you can do so by email, gyspodcast@gmail.com, gyspodcast@gmail.com. The Graveyard Show Podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and everywhere podcasts exist. And the show's available on YouTube. Have I mentioned that before? Have I mentioned YouTube at all on this program? I'm getting tired of talking about it, so let's move on. And if you know of any horror fans out there, please invite them to enter the Graveyard and my Catacombs of Horror. New listeners and friends are always welcome. Next show, I will have writer Maureen Whelan on the program to talk about the short story that she has in the horror anthology A Scream in the Night, which was put together by a friend of our program, Raina Young, Miss Misery, the queen of Bay Area horror. And I'll also talk to Maureen about her newest comic book that she created. It's a Viking horror story, so stay tuned for that, coming up on the next show. In the meantime, my friends, I look forward to seeing you again, as always, very soon. Please be safe, please stay healthy, and we'll reconvene in the not-too-distant future. And as you exit the graveyard, I would like to remind you to please lock the gate behind you. We wouldn't want anyone to get out. Until next time.